which I'm sorry to say they don't have anymore. The adult resource leader, who was a psychologist as well as a minister, gave all the adults the Myers-Briggs personality test. The point of this exercise was to eventually lead us into seeing how individual personalities impact the community of faith. The resource leader was himself young, extroverted, and outgoing, and admitted that he liked to party. In explaining the differences between different types of personalities, he pointed out that 75% of the American population are extroverts, outgoing and friendly, while 25% are introverts, shy and introspective, but that there are varieties of each type. The resource leader went on to explain that people who go into the ministry need to be extroverts, but the fact that they are sometimes causes them trouble in seminary because they have a hard time focusing on their studies. Introverts, on the other hand, have a strong sense of duty and don't mind studying, but a person who isn't outgoing and friendly doesn't stand a chance as an evangelist. One evening during that particular camp session, we were participating in the family recreation time. Attendance wasn't required, but it was suggested. That was where the children and the parents and the grandparents all got together and played games, with the children running around screaming and grandparents getting stepped on and stuff like that. We were playing that game that extroverts and children love. Everybody sits in a circle except for one person in the middle who's it. Then the person who is it has to go and sit in someone's lap and try to make that person laugh. If that person does laugh, then he or she becomes it and has to repeat the same exercise. So there I was sitting in a circle next to the only person in the universe I know who is shyer and more introverted than I am, and that was Jim Carls, who many of you know. I turned to him and I said, 25% of us do not like this game. And he replied back, 25% of us would like to leave the room. Well, we didn't leave the room, but through the magic of body language, we were able to deter anyone from sitting in our laps for the duration of the game, thereby unwittingly providing our resource leader with examples of extreme introversion. In biblical writings, one notices that a person's personality is seldom spoken of, particularly in the Old Testament. One gets little snippets of information that can lead to a speculation about someone's personality. For example, Sarah laughed when she was told that she would have a baby, and some people have suggested that she was being sarcastic. Moses was self-conscious about his speaking ability, and his brother Aaron had to speak for him, so maybe he was really an introvert. Saul got angry and threw a spear at David, and later went mad, so he was just a loose cannon. David cried and wouldn't eat when his son became ill after he committed adultery, so we know he had feelings of regret. But the Bible doesn't come right out and say whether or not someone was a type A or type B or had poor self-esteem or was an extreme extrovert, any of the other labels that we put on people today. And there's a reason for that. In biblical times, a person's behavior was more important than a person's personality. Tradition and duty were more important than whether or not people were happily fulfilled. Behavior was so important that losing a war was sometimes blamed on one person's bad behavior. When a person sinned, it set in motion a chain of consequences that had no end. In biblical times, Your behavior determined your character. And the individual was important only insofar as his or her behavior reflected on the whole community. Today's cultural context is quite different. We live in a society that champions individuality and rewards extroverted personality traits. We place personal fulfillment on a higher level than personal responsibility. We like to analyze people's behavior, and then we compartmentalize their personalities into type A's and type B's and type C's and whatever else there is. I don't know all of them. We are enamored of what makes a person tick, whether it is genetics or environment that makes people behave this way or that way. Sometimes we even make allowances for bad behavior by blaming it on personality traits. We might say, oh well, he's an alpha male, what do you expect? And so it is no surprise that when we encounter Luke's story of Mary and Martha, we say, aha, here is a story about divergent personalities. And in a sense, it is. The great Scottish theologian William Barclay says, it would be hard to find more vivid character drawing in greater economy of words than we find in these verses. Most of us who have read the story have a tendency to feel a bit sorry for Martha. There she was, trying to prepare a good meal and being overcome with frustration because there was Mary sitting in the living room chatting with Jesus, not helping at all. And yet Jesus says Mary has chosen the better part. Then we feel the need to make allowances for Martha by saying things like, well, the church needs both Marys and Marthas. But this story is a little more complex than that, especially in the light of what the writer of the Gospel of John says about this family. This is more than just a story about conflicting personalities. If indeed the Mary and Martha mentioned in the Gospel of John as the sisters of Lazarus are the same Mary and Martha we find in the Gospel of Luke, and I believe they are, the story takes on added meaning. According to the writer of John, Jesus had a deep emotional attachment to this family. We don't know the history behind this emotional attachment, but apparently he had known them for a long time. The implication is that Mary and Martha lived with their brother Lazarus. If they were unmarried, that would be the logical conclusion, since unmarried women usually live with a male relative. We get the idea that Martha may have been the oldest member of the family and that she was in charge of things. There's also the implication that this was a well-respected family, and we come to that conclusion because of the number of mourners that came to Lazarus' funeral. The more well-respected you were, the more mourners came to your funeral. The traditional viewpoint of the Mary and Martha characterization has been that Martha was outgoing and impulsive, the extrovert of the family, and that Mary was quiet and introspective, the introvert of the family. But one member of this family behaved in a way that was shocking in the light of the cultural norms of the day, and it wasn't Martha. By the time these events occurred, Jesus had gained a reputation of being a teacher. Some even called him rabbi. In that culture, it was forbidden for a rabbi to speak to a woman in public. When Jesus' disciples found him talking to the woman of Samaria at Jacob's well, they were shocked. They didn't say anything, but they were still shocked. And now, here was Mary sitting at Jesus' feet with the disciples and listening to Jesus teach. It's no wonder that Martha was upset. If this got out, their reputation could be ruined. Martha was worried about more than just the cookie. But Jesus says, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. One thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the better part. It won't be taken away from her." By allowing Mary to sit at his feet, Jesus was accepting her as a disciple. And then we see in the Gospel of John an event that was even more shocking and almost embarrassing to read about. Jesus has come once more to the home of Martha and Mary and Lazarus. They're having a dinner for him and his disciples, and Martha is serving. While they are at the table, Mary comes in and anoints Jesus' feet with some expensive perfume and then wipes them with her hair. The aroma of the perfume fills the room. For a minute, no one says anything. They're probably all too shocked. A good Jewish woman would never let her hair loose in the presence of men, let alone touch the feet of a man who was not her husband. Mary is behaving far outside of what is socially acceptable in that time. Then Judas, a thief who stole from the common purse, blurts out, "Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor?" Jesus simply says, "Leave her alone. This perfume was to be used in preparation for my burial, and this is how she has used it. You will always have the poor among you, but you won't always have me." By speaking once again of his death, Jesus saves Mary from further embarrassment by deflecting the attention away from her and onto himself. Jesus was trying to show his disciples that Mary had come to an acceptance that the Messiah must die. Shauna Atterbury says, "What if Mary got it? What if she listened and she believed what Jesus had said? He was going to Jerusalem to die." But what about poor Martha? To see where Martha really fits into all of this, we have to turn our attention to the death of Mary and Martha's brother Lazarus. When Jesus receives word that Lazarus is ill, he's in another part of the country, a 2 days journey from Bethany where they live. But instead of leaving right away, he intentionally delays for 2 days. There is a discourse between Jesus and his disciples about this, but that is another sermon, so we'll have to save that for another time. However, by the time Jesus does arrive in Bethany, Lazarus has been dead and buried for several days, and the home of Mary and Martha is full of mourners. Martha hears that Jesus is on his way, so she rushes out to meet him. The first thing she says sounds almost reproachful. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died." But at the same time, this is a statement of faith. Martha is convinced that Jesus' presence would have kept her brother from dying. And then she says, "Even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you." Although Martha didn't sit at Jesus' feet, she seems to have grasped the idea that Jesus' power came from God. And a few sentences later, she says, with absolute conviction, "I believe that you are the Messiah." Now, if you have been thinking to yourself, Martha sounds a little bit like Peter, your instincts would be spot on. They both behaved impulsively and weren't shy about saying so if they thought the situation was unfair. But it isn't just a